Welcome to Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. My name is Ken Karcher, and I'll be your host. And alongside me is my son, Austin, the co-host. Austin, how are you, bud?
I'm good, Dad. How are you today?
I'm good. It seems like it's been forever since we've had some time together. I don't know if our guests have figured this out, but, we reserve that first Wednesday of every month for you and I to talk about something that is relevant to our coaching profession or playing profession, or maybe called the performance-based industry.
Yeah.
But between that, we usually have 3 to 4 guests as well. And I guess all I can say about the month of July is I look back at our guest. Wow. What do you think?
No, it's hard to put into words. I mean, just the wisdom and the heavenly perspective or kingdom perspective that they brought, and just their story, and then their openness and vulnerability to let us in has been truly a blessing for me, if not any listener. But I know it's been fantastic for the listeners as well.
I don't know if anyone thought of it this way, Austin, but I was just preparing for our time together. I thought back to our 4 guests, and I said, here's Dick Vermeil, Super Bowl winning coach, DJ Dinkins, Super Bowl champion as a player, Todd Bates, national championship as a coach for the Clemson Tigers, and Troy Loney, 2-time Stanley Cup champion. And of course, they are champions in the profession that they are a part of, no doubt. But what I was encouraged by is just their heart and their gratefulness for their careers, their families, and their love for Papa. And it was definitely a great month. Every story's awesome, and it'll continue. And I just think of the one word for me and you, as we've talked, is I'm just grateful that Papa's allowed these people to cross my path over the last 40 years and now our path, and to share their story with our listeners. So hopefully our listeners have been as blessed as you and I. But as we said when we started this thing, if nothing comes out of this but you and I keep growing and are blessed, then amen. Thank you, Papa, for my son and I being together.
Absolutely.
So with that said, we've taken 7 episodes. It seems like it's gone fast, but we took 7 episodes to talk about different, let's say, characteristics of a kingdom coach. And once again, we talk a lot about a kingdom coach. I want to make sure people don't ever think that we're talking about a moment in time or this select little club or group of coaches that are better than others, because that's not what we're saying. But a kingdom coach is definitely someone that has a different perspective. And they're in the midst of a process of growing. Some of those growing pains, and some of those are growing with excitement. But we took 7 episodes, and I want to zero in on one of those that we talked about that's going to lead us into today, and that is the coach's ability to see and hear differently so they can understand the heart of their staff and their players and those they encounter. So that leads us to today's conversation. And we're going to talk about, over the next 4 episodes, what does it look like for a coach approach? We'll get into Jesus and the Papa and how they approached others, which obviously propelled me and you to talk about the coach approach. But the coach approach is about understanding the current state of a person's heart. We're coaching the heart and from the heart, so that we can coach their heart in a way that allows the seed that Papa plants to penetrate and root in their heart. We're going to use Jesus's parable of the sower to describe the 4 different soils which represent different states of a person's heart. Those 4 are the hard soil, or the hard heart, the shallow soil, the busy soil, or the distracted soil, and the good soil, the fruitful soil. And we'll take a week to talk about each one of those. The 3 passages that we'll work from are Mark chapter 4, verse 1 through 20, Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 through 23. And the one I'm going to read briefly from today, which is a favorite version of mine, the Passion Version, is Luke chapter 8, 1 through 15. Now, I think all of us are pretty familiar, I would guess most of our listeners, of the parable of the sower. And I just want to highlight a couple statements in this passage. Jesus just gets finished telling them the parable. And the disciples are right at the end of his description of the parable. He says, Jesus then added, shouting out to all who would hear. Here's what he says to us. Listen with your heart and you will understand. Listen with your heart and you will understand. Then he says to the disciples after they come to him privately and they say, what is there a deeper meaning that we can find in this parable? And he says this, he says, you have been given a teachable heart to perceive the secret and hidden ministries of God's kingdom realm. So we've been given a teachable heart. But to those without a listening heart, my words are merely stories. Even though they have eyes, they are not there. Even if they have eyes, they are blind. But the meaning of what I say, and even though they listen, they will not receive full revelation. So the words that jump out to me is, one, we've been given a teachable heart. But it's those that have a listening heart, which I hope our listeners will be challenged by as we go through today. It's those that would have a listening heart that will understand the heart.
Mm. Well, like you said, Dad, we're going to talk today about a hard soil. So we're going to focus on the first type of ground or soil that Jesus talks about in the parable. In the parable, it talks about the sower sowing a seed, and he throws it on a path. And the way we're looking at that path is that's hard soil, because the seed cannot penetrate the path. And because it can't penetrate the path, it gives room for the enemy to come and steal that seed. So today, as we look at the hard soil, the first question I want to ask is, how does soil get hard? How does it become a path that cannot be penetrated, or the seed cannot take root and get underneath the actual ground or the soil? Well, without thinking about in depth about, as soil functioning as a heart, just thinking solely about the ground or soil, soil grows and takes in nutrients by having gaps or voids for those nutrients or those seeds or the sunlight to be able to come in and make sure that the ground is ready to take in that seed and help it grow. So when there is no space or no gaps or no voids, then those nutrients, as well as the actual seed, will never be able to get in. So a hard soil, all the gaps are filled. It's so compact. Another thing that happens with a hard soil is it gets dried out because the nutrients can't get in and can't replenish the actual ground or the soil. It begins to become very hard. And think about a path. I mean, if you're walking on a path, it is it's sturdy, it's hard. Nothing's growing on it. It's just think back when Jesus was walking the roads back then. I mean, it's dirt paths.
It sounds like, Austin, it sounds like you described a pretty good defense too, right? They fill all the gaps.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good perspective. Absolutely. Yep. And they dry up what the offense can do, right, Dad?
Yeah, it can be very frustrating on that type of a day.
Yes, absolutely. And then the last thing that a hard soil is, it can become hard by the traffic or the things that trample over top of it. Well, just like we're talking about a path, a lot of people walk on a path. Well, when there's a lot of traffic or people walking over it, or animals or anything that is constantly on it, well, that kills the ground, and it doesn't allow it to be able to take in and that seed and grow the way it was intended to grow. So those are some of the ways that an actual soil can become hard. Let's transition from actual soil to what I believe the parable is talking about. The parable is not just talking about ground, it's talking about hearts. Soil represents hearts. And the reason we start with how soil gets hard is because I think there's so much that you can look at in the parable to draw from to describe the heart. Just like soil becomes hard from the filling in the gaps, it becoming dried out, or from the traffic that walks over it. I think those are the same things that happen to our heart. So, Dad, from your experience, what would you say has caused hard hearts, maybe in your own life or from just people that you've witnessed?
Well, I think that, first of all, if we're honest, all of us have issues that have occurred in our lives that have caused us, for at least a moment in time, to have a hard heart. The one that jumps out to me, Austin, growing up as a young man, is family trauma. And I think we see that, especially as coaches nowadays, with all the things that are going on in people's lives, but we all have stuff too, is that, when there's trauma in the home, there's opportunity for hearts to harden. For me, it was growing up with a home of depression. And in that depression, it made our family splinter. Everyone went their own way. And whether it was meant to happen or not on purpose, I know in my life, I became hardened, one, towards relationship with my parents and even brothers. And then also it became a situation where I was hardened in my relationship with Papa. I really had no desire for spiritual things at that point. And, I think about, you talked about filling in the gaps. I've been working through a book with a couple coaches, a coaching staff, read it myself, and it's called The Gap and the Gain. And, when you think about gaps and voids, I really believe it stems from the thought, and this book does a great job of it, that we think we're not enough. And we live in a world, in a profession where there's so much measurement and there's standards to meet and outcomes to fulfill. And it causes us to, live in a gap mentality where we're lacking what we think is needed or what the perception says is needed. And so once again, these types of gaps harden our heart. You also mentioned, that the soil maybe isn't watered. And a lot of times I think about, we're at the wrong well. You mentioned, I remember you writing something months ago in one of your journals about, where we live from the well of performance in many ways in this profession, instead of drinking from the well that produces the living water. Yeah. So I think that the parallel and the parable of the soil really is a great picture of our hearts as humans.
Absolutely. I mean, back to kind of the illustration of the different ways that soil gets hard. Well, the heart does the same thing, Dad. And I think, if we look first at, filling the gaps or the voids, well, we harden our hearts a lot of times with our independent way of living, our independent idols, because idols are nothing more than what we put our hopes and our faiths and our beliefs in. And see, what we have to understand is our belief systems about what our concept of God is, our concept of self and our worth, and our concept of others, is what fills those gaps and or those voids. If we're filling them with the Spirit, right? Well, that's where that seed penetrates. It goes right through and it gets into that soil, and then that soil produces roots, and then it, comes out of the ground, the actual plant. But um, if we fill the gaps or the voids with our own things that maybe we worship or things that we take pride in. I mean, one of them could be my own hard work, right? I
Mm.
can, you know, these beliefs that, if I just work hard enough, I will be blessed. Well, we end up having no room for the spirit to get into our heart and to transform our mind and to let us live this beautiful life that he has intended for us, because we have these things that block those seeds from getting to our heart. And
Austin, that whole, excuse me for interrupting you, but it made me think about, that whole statement you talked about, concept of God, concept of self, and concept of others. That was the life-changing moment in my spiritual journey in 2007-ish, where, going through that community of the ride that you've heard me talk about many times, and having to come to grips with what is my concept of God, going back to what you talked about, that hard soil and my family trauma. And it was just that thought of this distant God, as one friend spells GAWD, meaning like he's way up there distant, and having to come to understanding that he's not this distant God. He's my Papa. He's right here with me. And that's where it changed to Papa for me. And then that concept of self, it's not all about what I can do for God or what I have to do for God that gives me my value and worth, but understanding that he defined who I am and he gave me my value and worth by creating me in image and likeness. And then the concept of others, are you other centered or are you self centered? And I think if we're honest, most of us go through a period, especially in sports, where you're very self centered and it's about what others can do for you rather than being other centered. So I think that those are, you talk about belief systems, that was those life changing moments that I had to work through those three things right there: concept of God, concept of self, and concept of others.
oh, absolutely. I mean, it those things affect the way we live. Our beliefs affect the way we live and experience the life that, either we choose to live or that he has designed for us to live. And you know, so much we fill our gaps with ourselves that our lifestyle is all about us and what I can achieve and how I can make my name great, or how I can put myself in the best position. And when I do all those things with that mindset, that naturally pushes out others, which that's where, when we start living a life focused on others, like you said, that shared love, you know that's where growth and true life is found, is when we look out of ourselves. And then some other idols that we fill our gaps with is things that we worship. And you have to ask yourself the question, obviously when we hear worship we think about going to church, but worship is anything that I commit my time and effort and energy and thought processes to. Where does all your time and effort go to? It Jesus said, or it says in the Bible, if you ask and seek and knock, well, that takes time, that takes effort, that takes energy. He'll reveal himself to you. He's promised that. The problem is we spend a lot of our time, effort, and energy on things that are about ourselves and our what we believe that I have to do to either be accepted, or things that I believe make me valuable, or to please God would be another way to do it. Um, so we end up hardening our heart by filling our voids or our gaps with these belief systems that block the beautiful gift that God has given us from taking root in us. Another thing, Dad, that hardens our heart is sometimes we want to protect ourselves. We don't want people. We were talking the other day, Dad, about if we're on it truly being vulnerable, we want to be known and accepted for who we are
Mm.
and who we were created to be. And that's what God offers us. Unfortunately, we've all been hurt from other humans or situations where you've tried to be vulnerable with the hopes of being known, and you weren't accepted. and you were actually shunned or rejected. And because of that, that creates a heart that says, you know what? I'm not going to let you in. I'm not going to let you um, know me, because if you do, you'll hurt me.
Mm.
And so for me, Dad, it takes me back to I moved. I've lived in 11 different states. And I can remember moving for my senior year. And as you can imagine, you're moving in for your senior year of high school, and you're going to leave in a year. So a lot of my approach was I'm just going to protect myself, not get close. That way it's not hard to leave.
Mm.
And unfortunately, you miss out on life, and that type of hard heart misses out on the fruits and growing that can occur in all situations. So another way that a hard heart, so we talked so far is, hard soil and a hard heart, you fill your gaps, your voids with independent way of living. And another way is you try to protect yourself. See, seeds cannot penetrate the soil, and when you have a hard heart. And that's the whole thing with what you were reading from Luke, Dad, is you were talking about, hey, it's been given to you. The seed has been given to you, but you're not able to listen and to receive it. And you're not able to receive it because of the state of where your heart is in that moment. And therefore, that seed cannot penetrate the soil and cannot provide or cannot take root into your heart. And the enemy tries to take away it. Therefore, it's sitting out there for the enemy to come down, swoop down, and take that seed away. And something so beautiful that has been gifted to you, you never get to experience.
Makes me think. Two words jump out to my mind. One is more of a picture, and the other one is the word. Two words of, again, no relationship. But you just described this creates no relationship, and then it's the picture of the garden. Adam and Eve are in perfect union and relationship, created in image and likeness, and they fall for the lie of, if you do this, you can be like God. As I always say, wrong answer. They already are like God. We already are like God. But same thing, the enemy has deceived them to believe an illusion of their true identity.
Yeah. Well, so obviously, there's all throughout the Bibles, there's different people, and where there's people, there's hearts. And throughout the Bible, there's different examples of people of having hard hearts. And some of the things I want you to think about and kind of set the stage for our conversation is, as we think about these people and maybe why their hearts has been hardened, I want you to think about, how did the Father approach these people? And we're going to address that towards the end of our talk. But I want you to think about, okay, they have this hard heart. Well, how did the Father show himself?
Mm.
How did he try to soften or or penetrate these hearts to try to reveal himself to them? Because he loves all people, even when we're lost and confused and can't quite see him or what his gift is for us. So here's some examples of the people that I want to highlight that I would consider or have even clearly been stated in the Bible as having hard soil or a hard heart. The first one are just the Pharisees.
Mm.
And I think that the Pharisees have this hard heart. They filled their gaps with their pride of the knowledge of what their understanding of God and maybe the law. And they could not let the actual seed penetrate and take root in their heart, because they couldn't get past what they believed they knew about God and those laws that God gave Moses. And because of that, they were never able to let it in and take root. The second type or second person is Pharaoh. It actually says that his heart has been hardened, and his heart was hardened from his pride of his position and power. He was the leaders of one of the greatest nations at that time. And he had multiple gods that he worshiped and that he found hope in, but one, probably the greatest one he worshiped in, was himself. And he thought that everything, that he had the power and authority over all things. Then there's the heart of Naomi. Naomi was broken. She was hurt. Her husband and her sons were dead. And she actually changes her name to Mara, which means bitter, the bitter one. And she goes about life with this mindset that she is hurt and she is bitter. And she is trying to protect herself from any more pain. And so her heart is in a spot that she doesn't want to let anything in. She's hurt. And then the final one is the oldest son in the parable, where Jesus, talks about how the father gives allows his son to come back, his youngest son to come back after squandering his wealth. The prodigal son. And the oldest son can't see the love of the father because he's so caught up with, well, the youngest son did not do the right stuff. The youngest son didn't follow you. He didn't stay with you. He didn't honor you. And he couldn't see that it was always about the father's love that he has on all people, regardless of the good performance or the bad performance. So I list those names, and I want you to remember them, because when we get to the last part of this conversation, we're going to kind of look at, all right, these are the hard hearts. These are hard soils that happened in the Bible. How did the Father, whether literally from his hand or through his son or through other people, how did he try to reach the hard heart? How did he approach those people?
Well said. A lot of good stuff to think about there. Let me interrupt you for a moment. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have to do this podcast with my son, Austin. For the last 10 years, Austin and I have had many intimate conversations on his drive home from work. Some of these father-son conversations have been lighthearted, while others have been very deep and emotional. Over the Christmas holidays, we decided to start a podcast called Awaken Kingdom Culture, where we invite our friends to share their life-changing stories with you, our listeners. This podcast is done under our nonprofit, The Win Awakening, a sports ministry network for coaches, athletes, and those who lead. Our vision is to awaken hearts and minds, one story at a time. Our mission is to encourage coaches and athletes and those who lead to live from a place of victory, regardless of success, records, or the scoreboard. Our goal is to create safe environments where transparency and vulnerability are accepted, and value and worth are recognized in an atmosphere of love. Right in the middle of your mess, I'm reminded daily that the most important person of my day is the one in front of me, and that one matters, and that you are the one. WinAwakening.org is our website. I encourage you to visit our website, where you can encounter the good news of who you are in Christ and what you already possess and how to live from it. There you'll find blogs, videos, Andrew's journal, and this podcast, Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time. I'm thankful for all of you who have given and are a member of Team Win. Awaken Kingdom Culture is listener supported. And if you'd like to support us, you can go to winawakening.org. We are a nonprofit. I encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And please like, share, and write a review on Spotify or YouTube. Okay, it's time to get back to the podcast. So let's take a look at, we talked about hard hearts, hard soil. Well, how in the heck do you identify a player with a hard heart? And I want to give you some characteristics. I want to give you a couple causes, and then how does this manifest? So we as coaches and players, we're out on the field, because as we've said from day one, if what we believe doesn't show up at 2:00 on a Tuesday or 4:00 in the fourth quarter of a game on a Saturday, then really, is it worth anything? And so what do hard hearts look like? And what do we see? Well, I want to read a passage from Hebrews chapter 3, verse 17 through verse 7 through 19 quickly here from the Passion Translation, because I think it sums it up really well. It says, "This is what the Holy Spirit says. If only you would listen to his voice this day, don't make him angry by hardening your hearts, like your ancestors did during the days of their rebellion, when they were tested in the wilderness. There your fathers tested me and tried my patience. Even though they saw my miracles for 40 years, they still doubted me. This ignited my anger with that generation, and I said about them, they wander in their hearts, just like they do with their feet, and they refuse to learn my ways. My heart grieved over them, so I decreed, they'll never enter into the calming rest of my spirit. So search your hearts every day, my brothers and sisters, and make sure that none of you has evil or unbelief hiding within you, for it will lead you astray and make you unresponsive to the living God. This is the time to encourage each other to never be stubborn or hardened by sin's deceitfulness, for we are mingled with the Messiah. If we'll continue unshaken in this confident assurance from the beginning until the end. For again, the scripture says, if only today you would listen to his voice. Don't make him angry by hardening your hearts as you did in the wilderness rebellion." So when our hearts are hardened, there's no deep-rooted transformation, and we forget what Papa's already done in our lives. You hear me say this statement all the time, Austin, when I talk to people. You know, it's the question of who are we, or who are you? What do we have? And how do we live from it? That's the answer to life. Who we are, what we have, and how do we live from it? So looking at some
in that parable, Dad, what we have is that seed. It's been sown towards us. And, you know, the question is, how does it get rooted? That's what you just said. How do we live from it? How does it get rooted and then grow into this beautiful plant?
So here's 5 characteristics. I'm sure there's more, but here's some characteristics of what a hard heart looks like. Number one, they really don't have any spiritual perception, or they lack spiritual perception. They don't see spiritual truths and really the truth of identity. And think about all the people we've had on podcasts, Austin. Think of our coaches groups on Monday nights. I think of conversations I've had with individual people. It comes down to people don't understand who they really are, their true identity. And then even if they sort of understand it, they struggle with believing that it could really be true about them. So this lack of spiritual perception, a lack of understanding, unable to hear Papa's voice, they fail. This is big under that spiritual perception. We fail to remember what Jesus told us about ourselves. So their perception is lacking because they don't see, they don't hear, they don't understand, and they don't remember. So that's an example. That's one characteristic of a hard heart. They also lack expectancy. You know, you think of people that have zero expectancy of, man, what Papa's doing in my life, what he's providing, how he's working in me. A lot of times it's, that won't happen. Yeah. There's no wisdom. They live from their own wisdom of the world.
Which
they lack, they lack or don't have humility. Or they have a lack of obedience to what Papa has shown them to be true. So the characteristics of no spiritual perception, no expectancy, no wisdom, no humility, and no obedience. They live from the lack mindset, and that is one of the things that helps us identify a hard heart.
Yeah.
Some of the causes in James chapter 1, verse 24, I'm going to read that real quick for you here. And I think it sums up this as well when he talks about causes of a hard heart. He said, if someone believes, I think I got, oh, here it is. He says, if you listen to the word and don't live out the message you hear, you become like the person who looks in the mirror of the word to discover the reflection of his face in the beginning. Here it is. You perceive how God sees you in the mirror of the word, but then you go out and forget your divine origin. So what is the cause of a hardened heart? We forget the true identity of who we are, right? As I just said, that truth is stolen from our hearts, and we're trapped in this false illusion of who we are. That's what causes this. And then we want to look at, as we identify players with hard hearts, and we ask that question, what do hard hearts look like? What do we see? Well, here's how some of the hard hearts manifest. And I think this will really become very clear, and even to the point of we think of things in football or any sports. One of the ways it manifests, you see pride or foolishness in the way they act or handle authority. I mean, think of the times that you've coached and you got players that are living from a very prideful attitude, and they act foolishly because of it. They treat the authority not very good. They're invulnerable. They want to protect, right? They want to wear a mask. We've talked about wearing masks. I know I wore one for a long time in my life. They want to protect their heart. They want to cover themselves up. There's no emotion. They suppress or stuff down. I said to many coaches and players ever since, our family went through our great sadness, turned to restoration. But in that time of great sadness, I always said, if you're suppressing it or you're shoving it down or stuffing it, it's coming up. It's like a volcano. It's going to come up. Some other ways that it manifests is sadness, anger, depression, as I mentioned in our own home. They become hurt and bitter. So these are some ways a hard heart manifests that we can see. Now you say, well, how about, what are some ways we can hear a hardened heart? What does a hardened heart sound like? So you can visually see a hardened heart. What's it look like? And now we're talking about, how do you hear a hardened heart? Well, very similar. You can hear pride and foolishness by words. Before it was actions, but now it could be something said. We've talked many times. This will be something we'll share in one of the other soils. But the thought of words either bring life or death. Once again, that we can recognize that they are protecting themselves. Everything is surface level in their conversation when we talk to them, or they give you nothing. And then, once again, hurt and bitterness. They start to list, well, this guy did this. I mean, I think of even this morning, I was working with our young quarterback at the high school I help out, and he's always got an answer before I can even ask him the question. He's, well, this happened or that happened. We want to list excuses or grievances. We want to try to justify or complain. So identifying a player's heart is something that's a process as we grow as coaches, and we're able to see what they look like, and we're able to hear better, just as we read in those passages that we have to have a listening heart and one that can see and perceive. So once we've now identified it, how can we understand the hardened heart? It's got to be the question. How do you and I understand a hard heart? Well, I think the main way, and you would, I think, would agree, Austin, as we've talked about it many times off the air, it's what we do at Awaken Kingdom Culture. It's the podcast. It's listening to a person's story.
Yeah. You got to be willing. You got to be willing to sit and listen, because not just a hard heart, any type of heart. If you can't get into their story, then or get to hear, where they came from, what has happened. I mean, you don't get to truly know someone, and God is about that intimate know. He's not about just the knowledge of someone. He wants to know someone, not just what has happened to them, where were their emotions, where was their thinking, where was their heart in all of this.
I think you would agree with this. And we've had all types of guests. We've had guests that everyone in the country knows, and we have guests that no one's ever heard of. But I don't recall that we ever have had a guest that looked like he didn't want to be on.
Yeah.
And I don't recall a guest that didn't want to share his story.
Yeah.
What's been a blessing for me is I've reached out to different people and continue to do it. I've had one guy that has not been able to follow through because he got sick. Other than that, there's not been one person that has said no. So people want to share their story so we can understand the circumstances that they've grown up in or have had to work through. The influences, man, we've heard a lot of good stories about influences, right? Maybe a high school coach telling a high school player, I think you could be a good player, and it changes his life.
Coach Dungy and Coach Vermeil, right? They both had
Yes.
people speak into them to either continue to play football through their senior year or to go to college and pursue football.
And then asking the question why. We were able to dive into people's stories and ask why they were part of this or did this or chose that or how, so that whole why question. And then in hearing people's stories and trying to understand their heart, there's a preparation that I believe we're all a part of. Because when you're battling a hard heart, we're not the ones going to change it.
Right.
All we're going to do is get a knot on our head if we're trying to change it. But it's abiding in this love that Papa has for us. It says he first loved us, so we then can love others and love him. So it's abiding, it's resting, it's living out daily in his love. I think of the picture, Austin, I don't know if you've ever seen it in Mom's office. She has a picture of this bridge, and it's going over a body of water, which I think it's like a stream. And on the bridge, it says, love is the bridge to everyone and everything. And that couldn't be truer. It's love that allows us to have the first step into a person's heart. And then we want to be prepared by being hopeful. We may be the piece of hope for someone that doesn't have hope. It's the way we think about them or their situation. It's helping them to think differently.
Dad, you know how when you've been in the coaching profession, I've only been in it 12 years, but you realize and you look at yourself and you say, I've gotten a little bit callous to things. I've gotten hardened to some things because I'm used to it. I've been through it. I've been through the ringer a lot of times. And because of that, sometimes you write things off before they ever happen because you've kind of wrote the story, or you have this perspective. But the beautiful thing about back to a kingdom coach or someone is their mind has been transformed into the image and the likeness of the Father's. And they start to think of others and things through his lens. And because of that, God thinks of all things through the lens of what he can do in anybody's life.
Amen.
And the reality of that is there is no such thing as lack of hope, because with him all things are possible. So therefore, if our minds start to align with his and our minds begin to transform into alignment with his mind, we look at all people, even people with hard hearts, as someone that has hope. And therefore we don't cancel them or write them off or don't worry about approaching him. We still take God's seed and just be a part of helping him in that sowing process.
Well said. So we're preparing for battling a hard heart. And really, I think the word battling might be even misused. I think it's preparing as we approach a hard heart.
Yeah.
We talked about abiding in God's love. We talked about hope. The other one's compassion. We see it all through the scripture, right? Jesus shows compassion to those he encounters because he knows what they don't know.
Mm.
He knows that he is the answer.
Mm.
And so showing compassion, which is who we are, it's not acting out of a false identity. We are people of compassion because Christ is in us. The other is courage. Sometimes you got to speak truth. Sometimes we've got to say something that maybe is not popular, or we're saying something that helps them draw out and pour out what is truly in them.
Mm.
And then we need to ultimately stand firm as we approach the hardened heart in the truth of our identity and their identity, even when they can't see it.
Yeah.
It makes me think of my lifelong verse, Austin, 2 Peter 1:12. If I were to be remembered, I'd want people to say he was a reminder, because it says, I'll not hesitate. Peter's talking, I'll not hesitate to continually remind you of these truths, even though you are aware of them and are well established in the truth which is present in you.
Mm.
We get the opportunity to remind people that are hardened at heart, maybe at this time.
So we've talked about, understanding the heart. Let's transition to how a coach can help play a role in reaching a hard heart. Now, I emphasize play a role because at the end of the day, God does the growing, God does the changing or the healing or the restoring. And just as a side note that kind of popped in my head, Dad, is we go through seasons in football, right? But we also go in seasons in our life. There's seasons where our hearts become hard and then become soft again and become good soil. Sometimes we get super busy. So don't just think like I've passed this season of a hard heart. This is a continual, you know, thing that we go through seasons of all these things. As we
Heck, Austin, you made me think of 1982 is when I would have claimed that I said the prayer to ask Jesus into my life as a freshman at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And in 2005, after being fired at Liberty for a period of about 3 years for sure, we were really hardened in our heart. So, like you said,
Yeah.
you go through different seasons in order to grow closer to the one that loves you.
Amen. So back to, how does a coach play a role in reaching a hard heart? Well, I think you go back to the parable, right? How does a farmer work on a hard soil? Well, some of the things you can do to help a hard soil or a dried up soil or a trampled on soil is you can put compost or mulch on it to provide nutrients to help it kind of come back to life or be restored. Another thing that a farmer would do is he tries to aerate. Well, what does aeration do? It makes those gaps and voids come back, right? That can now give room for, penetration, right? And, how do they do it? They do it through like mechanical rototillery. And that allows air or oxygen and sunlight to come through and water. Another thing is, like I just said, water. Water can soften the hard ground. It rains down and takes something that is dried and it just softens it up and breaks it up a little bit. And then finally, a farmer will rotate its crops to give it rest, or so that it could then be healed again. Because the thing we forget, especially as coaches, because we're on such a timetable, we think everything has to happen now and it has to happen instantly. Unfortunately, in the kingdom, God is very patient because hearts take time. They don't always, behavior, sometimes you can get behavior to change quickly out of fear. But you don't get that eternal change that comes from the heart. If we want an eternal change, we have to be patient. And it might not be in this season that healing comes. And that's why it goes back to what you were saying, Dad, is we have to be strong in our own identity, because sometimes when you approach a hardened heart, they come back at you, and a lot of times not in a very kind way. And if you are basing your identity on your relationship with someone or pleasing someone instead of the love that the Father has for you, it will be hard to stand in those moments and still pour that love into that person. So, anyways, how does a farmer work on a hard soil? We talked about some of the things they might do. Well, there were some words that I focused on: nutrients, penetrate, soften, and redirect or rest. So first off, nutrients, creating a positive growing environment and positive people to be around. If my heart is hard and I'm surrounded a bunch of negative and other people's hearts that are hard, then we're just going to continue to live where we are. But when you're around people that are speaking life or experiencing life and reminding and providing hope in all situations, that can help restore a hard heart to begin to sense some healing. There's some nutrients, there's some life happening around something that is dead. And when life is around death, life triumphs.
Amen.
So the second type is penetration, right? For a farmer, he takes that rototillery and it has a bunch of spikes that are sharp, and they pierce the ground to create those holes in that hard heart or that hard soil, so that those natural ingredients or nutrients can get in and help the soil. Well, the same thing is, we can penetrate through being patient and humble, but speaking sharp and hard truths that can cut to the heart and that can create avenues for that seed to get back in. It might not happen right away, don't get me wrong. Okay, you'll probably get some negative feedback or some defensive words, but once again, if you're patient in time and you're humble and you're not responding to fight to be right, in time, God can take that and change a person's heart when they can look from a different perspective instead of their perspective of emotion and protection. The third type is soften. I love this one because I think this is the picture of Jesus. Because soften is like rain coming down, soften in that hard heart. And sometimes the only way you can get to a hard heart is radical love. Love that defies understanding. In the world's perspective, it would be considered reckless, but it's the truth of our Father's heart, and it just flows. And what it does is, like, you might be so hardened to what Jesus is teaching, but when you see him go and die and pour himself out for you, your heart, at least for me, my heart is softened to, there's something different about this person. And everything that he said before that I could not receive, I at least want to look into, because there's something different about this individual because of his radical love, which is nothing more than showing the love of who? Our Father. And then the last thing is rest, right? Or redirect our focus. And this is where, as a coach, we think we have to reach everybody now. But sometimes a hard heart needs to have a season of rest to be ready to receive in the future. Sometimes we just keep trying to penetrate and give harsh words or harsh truths. Well, it's not doing anything in that time. Sometimes they just need a little bit of space. They need circumstance to do work and God to do work. And sometimes us as humans, we feel like we have to do all the work. And that's not our role. Our role is to step alongside and do the work or the will of the Father, whatever He places on our heart to do in that moment. So, reaching different types of hard hearts. Those who have had hard hearts because of idols or beliefs that they have, it's probably the penetration or the hard truth. You know, those who are proud, humility. Sometimes they got to be put in their place to recognize where they are. Now, once again, that doesn't mean it'll be received automatically. But when they are humbled, they realize I don't necessarily have that power or control that I thought I did. Protection. How do we reach someone who tries to protect themselves? You expose their defense mechanisms. You show, hey, you think this is protecting you? What happens in this situation or this situation? Is that still going to protect your heart then? Foolishness, because if in the Bible it talks about a wise person and a foolish, someone who is wise submits to God's authority. Someone who is foolish does not. He has a hard heart. Well, a foolish person, we redirect their focus, or we give them rest and give time for circumstances and for God to work. See, truth can expose idolatry or humanity. Radical presence, patience, self-control, and sacrifice can all reach a hard heart. Circumstances can reach a hard heart, and obviously our Father can reach a hard heart. Now, that brings us to that question I asked earlier. How did Jesus approach those people to work on their hard heart? To work, right? Workmanship. It's a process. Didn't say it happened instantly. First one is the Pharisees, is what we said. And they had a hard heart, we talked about, because they have a hard heart because of their knowledge and their understanding, or their view of what they know about God and His laws, and their elitism. Well, God approached them with an aeration type of focus. He would give hard or harsh truths that would hopefully penetrate their thought processes, their beliefs about what they knew and about what they believed. Pharaoh, he was proudful, or had pride, or he was proud of his position and his rank and his power and his gods, and ultimately himself as a god. Well, it's hard to believe you're a god when 10 plagues come down that you can't control. That's humility. God brought humility to a man who thought he was greater than the God that he was being approached by. Naomi. Ooh, I love this one. I get chills when I think about it. Naomi was hurt, and she was bitter because she lost her husband. And some of us have been in those boats where we've lost people, and we've become hardened out of protection for ourselves. I mean, even Dad, when you lost your job back in 2005, we tried to protect ourselves from being hurt again. I know I did. And you become hurt and you become bitter. She changed her name to bitterness. And God sent the wife of one of her sons to demonstrate radical love, to say, where you go, I will go. And your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And over a time, she served her, and she loved her, and redeemed her family and brought back hope. And now Naomi and her family falls in the line of Jesus Christ. To me, he came to the hard heart with radical love for her. And then there's we said the older son. Obviously that's a parable, you know. But the father comes and he gives harsh truth to the son. And he says to his oldest son, I've given you everything and you have all those things. But I want you to remember something. I'm a God of love. And I don't stop loving someone just because they do something wrong. Now, that doesn't mean there's not consequences and there's not things that they have to work through. But my love does not change. And I'm sitting here waiting for you just like I'm sitting and waiting here for him. And that's a harsh truth that could help soften his heart. And then there's one more I forgot to mention. And I think this one's an important one because sometimes as coaches, we think that we are the ones that do all the reaching and it has to happen through me. We forget that we're intertwined in this big picture, in this big story of God. We think that we're the source instead of just a piece that the source can use. And I think of when Jesus sent out his disciples, they went 2 by 2 into all the towns surrounding where they were. And he gives them instructions before they go into the town. He says, don't bring any food or drinks or any change of clothes. Just bring what you have, and I will provide for you through people in those towns. If the town does not receive what I want you to bring them, which would be the seed, right? I want you to go outside the town, knock off your sandals, and move on to the next town. To me, I look at this as rest. Sometimes that town needs rest and needs for circumstances or for God to take over and strictly do the work out of his own hand. We cannot reach everybody every time we approach a hard heart. But because of that, with that said, that does not mean we don't approach them, because we come in with a hopeful mindset and we trust that our Father is the one that leads and does the growing. And even if in a time the seed does not penetrate, we trust that God is the one that will do it in his timing.
Well said. Well, I want to just challenge our listeners, those that are coaches, athletes, leaders, pastors, people that we've encountered over our last even couple months just through podcast, but specifically to the coach. As you approach a new season, you may be having a new staff that you're working with for the first time, a new team, and there's always a new hope at the start of a season. I hope today's conversation about the hard heart will be an encouragement to you. Maybe there's someone out there that finds themselves with a hardened heart today, and I can think of some that I know. Or maybe you're just coming out of that stage in your life, or you are surrounded with those that you're working with and alongside that you're trying to figure out, how do we reach them? Their heart is hardened. We looked at, what does a hardened heart look like? How do we go about understanding a hard heart? And how do we play a role in reaching those with a hardened heart? So as a kingdom coach, I go back to the phrase in Luke chapter 8, when Jesus says, listen from the heart and to the heart. Listen from the heart and to the heart. Do you have a listening heart? Proverbs 4:23 says this, so above all, guard the affections of your heart, for they affect all that you are. So today, listen with your heart, and you will understand, Papa says. So, Austin, I thank you for joining us today at Awaken Kingdom Culture, where hearts and minds come alive, one story at a time.